So greetings, everyone. Welcome back from our break. I'm excited about getting into the next session, which was mentioned by Colleen. Um, so for this session, with the pandemic outbreaks seemingly happening more frequently, we felt it's vital that organizations ensure that the lessons learned from COVID-19 can be employed in the future. In the past 17 years, for example, the world has had to deal with COVID-19, Ebola, MERS, SARS, swine flu, and bird flu, with at least 3 of those impacting air travel. The current pandemic demonstrates just how crucial successful contingency planning and business continuity is for organizations' resilience. So in this session, we are planning to discuss responses to the pandemic, the lessons learned, and approaches taken to ensure changes to contingency and recovery plans are implemented and tested. Now, I would like to put a poll up for all of you to partake in, and while that is happening, I would like to introduce my speakers. So can we go ahead with the poll, Jade? Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll see the pictures coming up, and at the same time, while you're going through that, you can hear me introduce the speakers. So I'm honored to introduce this all-star panel, and it represents diverse perspective on these complex topics. From SkyGuide, the Swiss air navigation service provider, we have Dr. Klaus Afholderbach, the Chief Safety and Security Officer, and Mr. Urs Launer, the Chief Operating Officer. From SANS, the Saudi air navigation service provider, Mr. Des Whitty, the Director of Safety, Quality, and Environment. And Mr. Gary Lloyd from Helios, who is a Principal Consultant and Business Performance Specialist. And so I would like to welcome them all. If we can go ahead and close the poll. And we see here that's interesting. I'm hoping that my fellow panelists can see that we have a pretty good distribution. Some were very well prepared. Some had some plans, but there were some gaps. Some had a good strategy with no documentation, and about 20% were totally caught off guard. So I think that's actually a pretty good sampling of our participants. So can we go ahead and pull the, there is a slide of all of the people that will be participating, and if we can go ahead and pull them up. So Klaus, Urs, Gary, and we have Des. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. So interesting responses from the poll question. I assume that you all got a chance to see that. And so I think we'll start off and look at the responses to the pandemic. First of all, let me say that if you have questions from the audience, please submit those and we will try to get to them in the open session. And so I'll go to you first, Klaus. Was your organization prepared for a pandemic crisis of this order of magnitude?
Thank you, Shane. Yes, I would say our organization was actually prepared well, as far or as you can be at all be prepared for such a crisis. I think this is really something we have seen in the poll. 100 level preparedness was probably not possible. Now, having said that, what we had done, and this was following on from the earlier events you mentioned, the earlier bird flu, swine flu, and so on. We had, for example, still masks and sanitizer in stock. We had active contracts with near-site hotels so that we could use them to eventually isolate critical stuff. All that was still in place. And we also, within our crisis organization, we had foreseen for such big events to operate in a task force mode. And this task force was then called basically an office end of February, was set up with various parts of the company, overall participation 50 people. And this task force is still running most of the operational things we have to do in this crisis. So there we were set up, and they are still operating. And there was very little interference necessary from the executive team into this part of running the stuff. So we really could focus on what was most important as well, and that was simply to be able to continue paying salaries. So we could really deal with the politics essentially. And there was one other aspect where I think we were lucky because, you know, and you might have heard that we are in the middle of our virtual center program, and that also means that in terms of network capabilities, doing things more from remote, it took us 1 week to get the whole administrative stuff onto our virtual networks to enable work from home. That took 1 week to basically get ready because we had done our homework there. So I would say we were prepared as much as you could have been prepared, but we are probably not prepared for something which is running over years now.
Well, thanks, Klaus. And I think we have the unique perspective of both someone from two individuals from the same organization, one from safety and one from ops. So I'll go to Urs and say, were there any national lockdowns or quarantine measures that impacted operational and maintenance activities that you had to deal with, and how did you manage those?
Yes, thank you, Shane. Yeah, indeed, we were very concerned at the beginning of the crisis because due to the proximity of our two centers in Zurich and Geneva of the national borders, you know, and we are very close to France and Germany, and due to that fact, we have a lot of people actually living in France or Germany, so crossing the border every day to come to work. And my question then was really, are they still allowed to come to work? Will I still have the appropriate number of ATCOs at disposal the day after? So we had to tackle this situation. It was actually the task force which Klaus referred to, that really tackling this problem and finding solutions. So we actually gave these people then a written confirmation that they work for companies located in Switzerland, that they are critical then finally to the Swiss operation. And so they were allowed to cross the border every day. But we also had the plan B in the drawer then finally to see, okay, if they can't come to work, how can we cope with the situation? And we made an alternative planning, then staff planning for ATCOs to have the right number of air traffic controllers in place if in case. But we also had the situation with the huge project in Geneva Tower, where we were very close of finishing it, and we worked together with the supplier in Austria, and we just waited for the site acceptance test to happen, and the guys were not allowed to fly in to Switzerland. So there we found an agreement with the states, then actually at state level, really to make sure that these guys came on spot and we could successfully complete the project then.
Thank you for that. So Des, different region, different perspective. I would say in terms of business continuity, did you have agreed minimum service levels to include those services that you get from outside suppliers from SANS?
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Interesting debate already. I think we had some similar challenges actually, as mentioned by Urs. Reference our business continuity and service level. Yeah, we had, I suppose, if you look at suppliers and ATC services, if I talk about ATC services first. So we're governed under obviously our AIP. We have operational specification where we must deliver services of a certain level and standard across the kingdom. And we thankfully successfully did that during the pandemic, during lockdown and so on. We were able to basically put our staff on standby and continue to deliver those services using obviously sort of unique solutions to very novel and unique challenges. So in doing so, also with regards to our suppliers, so quite similar to Urs, we had a very big challenge where we were actually implementing a full sort of upgrade to our network and our infrastructure, which was changes to our MSSRs, ATM system and voice comp system, all particularly at the same time. So 3 independent projects running to change all of that, working with all of those vendors and suppliers. So yeah, we also ran into some challenges with regards to bringing them into the country. They're traveling around the country. And in a certain location, for example, we actually put a lot of pressure on the safety to do consistent safety risk assessment to ensure that we were able to essentially deliver our system. So we were in a state where we had systems implemented in 2 locations. We had started doing transition in a separate location for the voice comms, and our suppliers were unable to travel. So we had to come up with a novel solution. So they actually joined remotely via link from Europe, and we were able to do the configuration and continue with the transition to full operations, because the risk of not doing anything, staying static for that period of time, was obviously a big challenge. So yeah, so our business continuity at that particular time had not, let's say, captured this particular outcome. I mean, if you were to say 1 year ago, what is the probability of total global lockdown and closure of airspace, you would think you were crazy. But it happened. So, I mean, we were as prepared as we could have been. I mean, our framework in the business continuity was thankfully able to cater for that, and we were able to basically make decisions at daily meetings to come up with these solutions to work the problem, essentially.
Okay, thank you, Des. Very, very enlightening. So Gary, you're a principal consultant and a business performance specialist, so that gives you a unique perspective of how ANSPs are dealing with this. And so can you give some insight into what extent the standard contingency planning helped ANSPs respond to the pandemic scenario? You're on mute, Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Thanks, and some really interesting insights there from the other panelists. I mean, I was a system engineer with NATS as well for 12 years, so I've worked inside contingency systems. But I just wanted to take a step back a bit, because we looked at the results of the survey there, with about 75% of respondents saying they had at least significant gaps in their plans, and Des talking about unexpected circumstances that weren't covered by business contingency planning. And you know, the progress we've made as ANSPs over the past 20 years plus in safety is a story in itself. You know, as Osman was saying earlier on, safety is not a given. As ANSPs, it is our business, and that's why we've come so far on the safety management, safety culture journey. But what this brings into stark relief, the COVID crisis, is that safety itself is not enough to guarantee our income and our survival. And that's where business continuity management really has an increasing level of importance. And what we find with the clients we work with, it's a lot less mature and consistent in its implementation among NSPs than SMSs are. Typically, business continuity management focuses rightly on operational contingency. So that's in response to disruptive events. And generally we think of these as the supply side shocks, if you like, the things that go wrong for us, the system failures, the workforce issues, the loss of the center even. And why COVID really stands out, and we have had some before, but not to this extent, is it's a demand side shock. And quite often in business continuity management, where we're looking at contingency and what specifically could we lose and how would we cope with that, this supply side shock wasn't on the map. It's not often on the radar, and that's not a surprise that it's missing from a lot of operational contingency plans.
Great, Gary. Thank you for that. So we talked about responses to the pandemic. Let's kind of move into some lessons learned, some takeaways that we gather from that. And Urs, I'll start with you on this one. Can you give me some specific observations you made during this low to very low traffic period?
Yeah, actually, well, it was very, very difficult, and still is, by the way, to keep the motivation of the air traffic controllers high and keep the focus on the real work. So we have had 2 or 3 incidents maybe that were clearly happening due to the fact that the ATCO started to do things differently to what they have learned to do, simply because they were of the opinion that, well, there's not a lot of traffic around, so I can allow myself to deviate from procedure X and do that different, But then you can really realize that actually there's no routine in it, and that's where then finally the strange things happen. And I had a different experience then with one of a pilot from the Air Force wanting to do a training flight into Zurich with a helicopter. And it is true, there was no traffic around, and he wanted to fly in runway 28 while runway 14 was in use. And the ATCO then told him, no, sorry, sir, you have to land on runway 14. And the guy came to me and said, what happens there? There's no traffic around. And he did not allow me to land on 28 instead of 14. And I said, yes, I understand your frustration, but basically I'm happy with what the ATCO did, because even in low traffic situations, you have to stick to the procedures, you have to stick to what you have learned. Otherwise, there's quite a danger to drift into failure in such a situation. And that was very interesting to see. And I think that's also some of the learnings we have to take with us for ATCO refresher courses, to remind the guys that even in low traffic periods, please stick to the procedures you have learned.
Very interesting, very interesting. So Klaus, if you look more from an organizational perspective, can you tell me what went well in your organization during this pandemic, and some areas, maybe your biggest weakness?
Okay, so I mentioned again this task force because that really proved to work extremely well, and it was managed by our operational managers. So basically, it was team on a rotation basis, so that nobody really got completely saturated. I think what also went extremely well was the collaboration with our staff associations, because we had short-time work applied in the company, but we were not sure at the beginning, will the traffic come back very quickly, or will it come back only whenever it comes back? And therefore we wanted to be prepared, and that went very well. So the rostering was done in various scenarios, and the associations basically all agreed to show significant flexibility to support us here. I think that's worth mentioning as well. Another thing which we probably also underestimated at the beginning was the need for, social care, for critical incident stress management. So my whole team was mobilized, and we had quite significant work to do there. So also that I think was a good sign. And then probably a bit as a surprise, but also communication in confinement. I mean, it was mentioned there are issues with cross-border workers. I am one of those, so I'm sitting here in France in confinement at the moment, but it doesn't stop me from doing my work and my day job. And it also did not stop us from staying in touch with our guys. So also that worked well. And what I also think is important to mention, the collaboration with our regulator. That was really supportive. At that moment in time, during the beginning of the crisis, they really supported us, and they were no longer a supervisory authority. That was very, very supportive. Of course, there were a couple of things which not went so well. So one thing, and I thought would eventually mention it, but that's the fine-tuning of collaboration with our stakeholders. There was one example one day at Zurich Airport. Basically, if you look to the overall traffic figures of that day, you probably have seen 20 movements, but they were all planned during half an hour in that day. And then our capacity was not sufficient, so we actually managed to create delays with 20 aircraft as an airport where you can rather handle 1,000. And that's purely the fine-tuning and the data sharing, information sharing. So there we probably need to improve, and we improved, but this is also a learning for the future. And then I think was mentioned it as well, our staff now, and this is not only the operation stuff, it's in the entire company and probably in the entire society, what we see. People are fed up. And we were all really happy when we went out of the first confinement period. The summer was more or less normal. We got used to certain measures, but now doing it all again, that is difficult. And this is probably something also for the future, that eventually we have to be prepared for really long crisis and to be prepared for managing that. So that's in a in a summary what I would say as lessons learned and what went well and what didn't.
Those are some very interesting points, especially about the extended lockdowns or repeating lockdowns and the impact they can play. So Gary, what do you think this crisis can teach us about effective resilience management?
Okay, I think, I mean, it's interesting. We actually have a lot of different definitions of resilience that we use in our industry. I mean, leaving aside for the moment systems resilience, redundancy, etc., and even human resilience in terms of knowledge and skills, even at an organizational or a business level, we have different definitions of resilience. And this is not always resolved before we talk about it. So, for example, in ISO standards, we have a definition of the capability of an organization to continue to deliver at a predefined capacity during a disruption. And typically we do think of it in that way. The UK CAA uses a similar definition about service delivery and continued service delivery. But in the case of COVID, that's not really what we're talking about. Maintaining capacity when there isn't the demand is not the problem. The problem is business continuity. The problem is, how do we keep all our controllers current? How do we become ready for a rebound, which is quite often the future? And how do we survive financially in the interim? A nicer and simpler definition, which is actually used by Eurocontrol in their contingency guidelines, is simply the ability of an organization to resist being affected by an incident. And that allows us to extend that business definition. And I think that that's by working, you know, I mentioned safety management systems before. We need to raise business continuity management to the level of consciousness as safety management systems, and have a resilience culture, and test these business continuity management systems in the same way, continuously improve them in the same way that we do with safety, but with this broader definition, so that actually we're planning these scenarios for demand side shocks and what that will do to our businesses. And the solutions are out there. The solutions, some of them we're going to talk about in the rest of the conference today, involving automation, involving virtualization. But with that resilience culture, that will help us to bring those technical solutions, which are otherwise, you know, quite alien in terms of the way we work, that will allow us to bring them on board as a team and as an industry.
Very good. Interesting points. So Des, you've been, you know, I've known you for quite some time. You've have operational background. You spent a great deal of time in another ANSP or in a different region now. I would like to get your input on compared to other crisis scenarios with rather short duration, a couple of days or a week at the most. Where do you see the difference to this long-lasting COVID crisis?
Yeah, I think as Klaus and Gary mentioned, I mean, the prolonged sort of implementation of this crisis has been quite challenging. So, I mean, business continuity planning typically is built around the loss of a service or equipment for a defined period of time, and restoration within a defined agreed limitation, whether that be hours or days. So in this instance, we had it wasn't very sudden or dynamic. It was a slow build up that we knew this was happening, and globally we were watching and pinned to the news and state level what was happening, and we then implemented those actions. So we did have a level of, I don't want to say lead in, but we did have a level of opportunity for planning, where, you know, we might not have had so much in the past with other sort of business continuity. We could be prepared, and then we would deal with the crisis as it arrived, which typically would be quite sudden. With this particular long-lasting COVID, it as our, let's say, knowledge base built over the awareness of COVID, what it can do, how it can spread, how we can work to protect our people, you know, and then following state guidelines from Ministry of Health, Ministry of our Interior, Human Resource, you know, Ministries of Education, like basically all of these ministries were bringing out guidelines, rules, plus following the likes of ICAO and our regulator. And I'd also like to echo what Klaus has mentioned in reference to regulator. We worked incredibly closely with GACA, our regulator. We formed a task force as well, and we developed actions, which, I mean, even today, we still have our crisis team sitting together, and we have regular updates on progress and what we're doing, and suppliers and so on, and cases of COVID. Additionally, we were able to sort of develop, let's say, a risk impact questionnaire. So if somebody believed they had been in contact, or found out they had been in contact with somebody Well, then we were able to do contact tracking, tracing, complete the questionnaire, and we developed this risk assessment where you're either high, medium, or low potential, in which case, if you're high or medium, you were not allowed come on premises and you would have to get testing. So, and then report back on the testing. So this sort of prolonged, long lasting. We also had the issues with potential, you know, skills erosion with low levels of traffic, potential for, you know, our English language proficiency and medicals to run out. We required exemption. Thankfully, we've recovered all of those ourselves from SANS. So everybody is back on track. We're back on regular, let's say, updates with regards to our medicals and English language proficiencies and so on. So yeah, it was the long-lasting thing, and I think Klaus mentioned fed up. It's something we're dealing with, and I don't want to say COVID fatigue, but we have to be relentless in our pursuit of safety when and delivering operations for people, and the world has to continue, I guess, you know, and slowly we will build back to that standard and level.
So that's a good segue into going into, let's look at the future aspect, and having that unique operational background, and then the safety side as well as the multiple ANSPs perspective. Where do you see the biggest operational challenge with the current very low levels of traffic tests?
Yeah, so, you know, as I mentioned, you know, with the low levels of traffic, that presents challenges. So we discussed the fact that we were in our operational transition from our voice comm system and our technical ATM system, and essentially we were unable to validate some of those requirements within the site acceptance testing and the transition arrangements, you know, our procedures and the requirements. So we ended up having to have a prolonged transition, which thankfully we were able to validate all of those requirements. As I mentioned, somebody mentioned we were the first in the world to do it. I'm not sure if this is correct, but I'll fly that flag for SANS, which is the remote connection for doing the configuration and so on. I mean, that presented challenges for us for safety. It's one of these things where we had never looked into this before, and thankfully we successfully did that without any major issues. And I think when we look very much in the individual, so if we look at sort of the human factors, human performance element, the well-being of our staff over time period where people are worn down with wearing masks, ensuring social distancing, ensuring we have, you know, particular distance between our OGTIs and our trainers and our competency assessors to make sure we have to keep our people current, we have to keep our people operational, and same with our engineers. So training of our engineers doing on-site work where it takes 2-3 people to do the work rather than just one. So all of these were very sort of novel challenges, and I think from all of that, some critical items is underload and low workload and skills erosion, not only for ATC, by the way. So we're looking at pilots that probably have skills erosion, ground people have skills erosion, people who operate locally on an airfield have this level of awareness that they would have had before in a busy environment has now somehow depleted or not been triggered. So maybe there's a level of complacency there. So when you have everybody in the industry business at this level, it's really when we should be paying attention, you know.
Very good. So let me pull that thread a little bit and go to Urs with the operational perspective. So how do you intend to overcome the issue of not being able to properly train ab initio ATCOs on the job as far as we are from any meaningful sector loads? How are you planning to deal with that?
Yeah, this is in fact one of my major headaches currently because the traffic does not allow to run a meaningful on-the-job training actually in Zurich and Geneva. Nevertheless, we have the situation that within the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to lose a third of our air traffic controllers for retirement. So I am obliged to actually inject another set of air traffic controllers, bring in young fellows, and make sure that we have the appropriate amount of people, workforce at disposal. But because we all know that traffic is gonna come back, so we have to find a way. And what we currently do is, again, of course, together with the regulator and our academy, to find ways of improving or increasing the level of simulation. Also, then finally in the second or third phase of an air traffic control training, I'm deeply convinced it would, of course, be completely wrong to lower the bar for an air traffic control to jump over in order to get his or her license. This is not the right way to go. But we have to be creative, and there are certainly means of doing that together with the training academies and the regulators to see how we can do that differently. Because I think one of the learnings also out of this crisis, in many domains, we have identified that we have concepts available for the perfect situation. We were used to situations where traffic rose by 2, 3, 4, 5% every year, so that worked fine. But what happens if the contrary appears? We were not everywhere prepared for that. And training is a typical case for me, where we have to look into now and find new ways of training the guys. We were very successful together with the academy at the beginning of the crisis to very quickly switch to distant learning for the ab initio trainees. I was very surprised and I was very impressive to see how quick this could happen. And now we just simply have to continue the path and see what we can do in terms of on-the-job training. We all hope that traffic is going to come back very quick. But as you said in your introduction, Shane, we might be confronted with such crises again, with maybe another virus or another reason for it, and we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, that's good. And I think this really sets up the conversation that follows with the human performance element, and Miguel having that training background. Hopefully we can tie that together, because I think it is a concern for a lot of organizations. So Gary, how might ANSPs going forward in future planning, how might they develop their approach to contingency and resilience going forward?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the need and the appetite really exists at the moment. Billy earlier referenced the Aegis Avia new possible industry-wide survey, and the top 3 industries, according to industry participants in that, the top 3 opportunities of the crisis came out as number 1, improving service scalability and resilience, and then the following 2 were better collaboration and faster uptake of technology. And if you combine those 3 things together, then this is a real opportunity for ANSPs to look at resilience management and to collaborate on a new way of considering it and making our industry a lot more resilient to shocks in the future, which there will undoubtedly be some. I think it's really important to note that each ANSP has really unique requirements in terms of what it will need in terms of business continuity management, right down from what actually constitutes a critical service for that ANSP, from whether it's the complexity of the airspace and relationships with neighbouring states, right down to sort of cultural and local holidays and so on and so forth. So an independent view is useful. But I think CANSO has a key role to play as well in information sharing and in leading the way on solutions for the future resilience of ANSPs.
Very good. So we started, when you talk about the future, really looking at the individual level, both from the ADCO and the ATSAP, and kind of pulling it up into the organizational perspective. So Klaus, if you really step back and you look at this, what do you think some of the longer term consequences of this crisis will look like as we look back over a period of time?
Okay, so what I can say with 100% certainty is that the world after this crisis will look different. And it will look different also for our industry and our environment. I could leave it there, but of course I had another couple of reflections on that. So what we currently see is the financial pressure on our customers, and then coming from our customers on us, well, at least from those who will survive, because I think this is also something we have not fully realized, that a lot of airlines now are simply fighting for survival. And this pressure will hit us very hard, and I think it will force us into transformation of our services, and it will also force us to become much more scalable. And this is then, I think it was mentioned in the session with Osman, and I don't know who else said it, but there will be increased pressure. And that means in this change management process, I think Armin said it, that, you know, controllers are not really known for being extremely open to change. I think I can confirm that from our organization as well. But it's not only the controllers, it's our entire setup really. And there, what we have seen in the past is that if there is something not really according to the safety requirements, people quite rightly take up the red card, the safety card. But if we are under this kind of pressure, then we probably might see also a misuse of the safety card, and then identifying the real safety issues in this transformation might be quite complicated, because also the whole safety management system will somehow be under pressure, and therefore we must make sure that we don't overlook things. So distinguishing from what really will have the safety impact and what won't. So this is really a challenge I see. And then digitalization has hit us exponentially as well. And we, at least there, should see the opportunities. I mean, this forum today is one of the great examples. We can meet together. Of course, Nairobi would have been much nicer, but in the way we are doing it now over the globe, it's much easier. And it works, and it starts to be part of our normal. And therefore, we should at least also try to take that over into the new world. And, you know, this collaboration, which has increased in some areas because it's easier in the virtual world, this is probably the positive thing we should try to carry over. And then, of course, I hope that we will all be able to meet in person very soon again, somewhere around the globe. If an aircraft is flying there, if an airport is operating, and if the infrastructure is welcoming people from countries where today it's simply not possible.
Well, thank you, Klaus. And I think one of the things that that speaks to me when you were giving that explanation is the flexibility and adaptability that Osman referred to in the front of organizations being able to do that. Because you're right, we probably will never get back to what normal was before. It will look different. And some of that is still to be written. So we're into a lightning round. We got about 2 minutes, and I would like to give each of you about 30 seconds to answer this, because obviously we've moved a lot of stuff. We're all virtual right now. Looks like we're all working from home pretty much. And so I'd like to get your perspective on whether working from home has been effective and had an effective impact, or positive impact on your organization, or if it's had a negative impact on your business delivery or operation. So I'll start with Gary. Your perspective in 30 seconds or less, positive or negative?
Well, obviously negative. It's much nicer to work with clients and with partners face to face and to see them in the room. But I will say that there's been amazing goodwill on both sides, and the projects that I've been involved in have worked really well. People have quickly got to know each other and got used to working remotely, and we look forward to the times when we can sit together again. But I think everyone's making a huge effort, and that's what makes it work.
All right, Des. Thank you, Gary. Des.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Good question. We have actually found, possibly, I would argue, an improvement and an increase in productivity due to working from home. And even at the moment, in our return to office recovery plan, we're back to 70% in the office. I'm at home today, actually, because of connection issues. But yeah, we have found it to be very beneficial, very productive, very sort of easy. I don't want to say from bounce to meeting, but it's been incredibly beneficial. And I think as we move forward and come out of this sort of crisis and shake off the COVID name and COVID itself, I think it'll be a new way of doing business, a new way of learning, a new way of educating, a new way of actually putting forward this type of forum as well. But I obviously, maybe what Gary mentioned, I would also agree. We're all human at the end of the day. We like social human interaction. Being in a room and sitting face to face obviously has a lot of value as well. But yeah, we found it to be actually very, very beneficial.
Good. Thank you, Des. Urs, you got 30 seconds or less, if we can.
Yeah, less. So I think it's a bit of both. We were able to do things which we would not have thought about before. But on the other hand, yes, the social aspect is not to be underestimated, and a lot of problems are usually solved over the beer in the evening and not in the meeting itself. And we have to get back to that too. So let's take the best out of it.
Thank you for that. And then Klaus, final thoughts on this, positive or negative?
Very briefly, at least for myself, I gained between 15 and 20 hours travel time per week. So there is a significant increase in efficiency there, but there are areas where it's simply more difficult to not sit face to face. So it's a yes and a no. Interesting.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank my panelists. You guys gave excellent answers, very insightful. I appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Kenzo, Colleen. Thank you.